Imagine that everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie. Dan seems like the perfect father and husband, but beneath the surface he's hiding a deadly past. When a dangerous figure from his former life resurfaces, his family is threatened. With assassins on their tail, Dan must use his old skills to protect them. Can this family survive the storm, or will his past destroy everything he's fought to build? The film opens with Dan, a skilled salesman at a used car dealership in Buffalo, New York. Known as the best in the business, he turns down an opportunity to have his photo taken for the company's website, because he has plans to celebrate his 18th wedding anniversary with his wife, Jessica. At home, Dan is very organized and follows a strict schedule, and upon arriving he is greeted by his wife and their 3 children, Nina, Kyle and Max. Jessica, at this time, is involved in a disagreement with Nina about college choices. Initially, Nina had planned to attend Stanford University to study journalism, but later changed her mind to go to Southern Iowa University, where her boyfriend Trevor also plans to go. Jessica asks Dan to intervene, but Nina is firm in her decision. Later, Dan plans to take Jessica out to celebrate their anniversary, and asks Kyle to babysit Max. Kyle, however, has other plans and passes the responsibility to Nina, much to her annoyance. Eventually she relents, motivated by her excitement to study at the same university as Trevor. Meanwhile, Kyle meets up with his friend Samir, where he is expected to work on a group project. It turns out Kyle had only gone there to play online games. It is revealed that Kyle is a famous online gamer with the alias Killboy, boasting a large fan base. Dan and Jessica head to an amusement park for their anniversary, but Jessica is frustrated by Dan's rigid planning. She wishes for more spontaneous family trips. After a few rides together, Dan promises to plan a family vacation, which cheers Jessica up. However, their moment is interrupted when a group of teenagers snaps a photo of them kissing. Dan asks them to delete the photo, but things get worse when one of the boys pours his drink on Dan. Rather than fight, Dan calmly walks away. The following day, Jessica, trying to cope with the household stresses, takes up boxing to release her frustration. While practicing, she accidentally punches another woman named Gwen, leading to an apology and a conversation. Jessica confides in Gwen about her frustrations with Dan, particularly his reluctance to take family vacations. Gwen, who is a tour guide, hands Jessica her business card and encourages her to consider a vacation. Elsewhere, Dan is shopping with Max when a stranger suddenly attacks him. To everyone's surprise, Dan defends himself with ease. Afterward, Dan returns home, revealing a secret drawer full of weapons hidden under the stairs. Clearly concerned, he contacts his friend Augie to request new identities for himself and his family. Dan hurriedly goes to pick up Nina from school, only to learn from a fellow student that she had quit the school magazine 3 months prior, much to his surprise. He eventually finds her, and when Dan asks why she quit the school magazine, Nina reveals she felt unsupported because Dan never read her articles. Nina also informs her dad that Kyle is not in the chess club as he ought to be that day. Dan eventually drives to Samir's house, and he retrieves Kyle from there. He expresses his disappointment with both of his children, and tells them that they are grounded. Finally, Dan goes to Jessica's office to inform her that they will be going on their long-awaited vacation. Though the family is excited, Dan soon becomes weary when a black van pulls up at the building, and then begins to tail them while he drives. All the while, his family never notices that they are being chased. He's alert to the threat and evades the vehicle. He suspects that he is being tracked, so instead of staying on the road, he drives into his car sales office. He searches for and soon finds the tracker that is placed under his car. Dan retrieves the device and attaches it to another vehicle. It was his co-worker's car, who was unaware of the chase and inadvertently led the pursuers away. As they embark on their vacation, Dan becomes increasingly paranoid, going as far as throwing all their cell phones off a bridge to prevent tracking. The family grows closer on their road trip, singing songs together along the way. About that same time, Dan's house is broken into by McCaffrey, the man hunting Dan and his family. When he discovers Dan has escaped, he asks his men to find him. Despite their best efforts to remain off the grid, Kyle's fame as Killboy draws unwanted attention when a girl fan takes a photo with him and posts it online. Their cover is blown and McCaffrey's men pursue them, initiating a high-speed chase. Dan, using his combat skills, manages to take down the attackers one by one. Fortunately for him, the entire family was beginning to feel sleepy when the men drew closer to their car. The only one awake was Max. So he increases the volume of the car stereo and begins to take out the men. Max obviously enjoys every move his dad makes and cheers him on. At the very end, Jessica wakes, but Dan convinces her that the bumpy feelings were merely a pothole. But Jessica soon begins to feel something was going on. After stopping for a rest, Nina convinces Dan to visit Southern Iowa University. As the family walks through campus, Kyle shares his disapproval of Nina's boyfriend, Trevor, causing Nina to reflect on how much she has changed. Meanwhile, Jessica reflects on her past as a pole vaulter and the injury that forced her to give up her dreams. Dan listens but refrains from sharing his own past. Dan becomes suspicious about a man close by, and he confronts him. He believes that he is one of McCaffrey's men, only to discover he is a harmless corn seed salesman from Germany. Things take another turn when Nina catches Trevor cheating on her with another girl. Heartbroken, she breaks up with him and becomes very sad when she returns to her family. But Dan found a way to cheer her up, and even recommended a skill in self-defense called Kyusho Jitsu. Nina uses this to overpower Trevor, who ends up on the floor in pain. Nina returns this time, very happy, and Jessica was amazed how a few words had transformed their daughter. On the road again, Nina reconciles with Dan, apologizing for leaving the school magazine and promising to return. The family continues their trip, growing closer along the way. Still on their journey, Dan calls Augie to confirm if they are still on schedule for the passports he had requested. Kyle is still frustrated by his father's disapproval of gaming, and challenges him to a laser shooting game, where Dan wins with minimal effort. This humbles Kyle, but Dan reassures him with a hug, showing his support. They eventually reach Las Vegas, and the family is blown away by the beauty of their hotel. Dan quickly goes to meet Augie to get the new identity and passport. He then takes Jessica to enjoy a romantic dinner, but Kyle and Nina take Max out so they too can get a feel of Vegas despite their father's warning. Kyle soon became invested in the games, and one of the boys showed interest in Nina. When Dan called the room to confirm how they were doing, there was no answer. So, assuming the worst, he hurried to the room with Jessica. Everything seems okay, but soon, some of McCaffrey's men attack and take Jessica hostage. Dan, using his combat expertise, takes out the men, but the truth finally comes out. Dan reveals his true identity as Sam, a former assassin who escaped from McCaffrey's organization years ago. He had become very disappointed at how the organization started using their men to kill even good people. He couldn't live with that, so he quit. Jessica was both shocked and amazed at the news. When they eventually reached the children, they too expressed their disbelief. Jessica is furious that Dan had kept this part of his life hidden for 18 years, and Kyle accuses him of being a hypocrite who is totally against killing people in games but in reality kills real people. Dan pleads with them, stating that he hid the truth just so he could keep them safe. But Jessica isn't convinced, so she decides to take the children and leave. She contacts Gwen to arrange a getaway, but they soon realize they've been tricked. Gwen is actually one of McCaffrey's agents, and she has a score to settle with Dan after leaving her. She lures Jessica and the kids into a trap, hoping to exchange them for Dan. McCaffrey told Dan he now has his family, and orders him to come to a location if he wants them alive. When they met, Dan's family eventually discovers that McCaffrey was actually Dan's father, their grandfather. He then gives Dan two options: to return to the organization and his family goes free, or he kills everyone, starting with the family. Dan refuses to return. But when McCaffrey orders Gwen to kill Jessica, Dan gives up and agrees to go back to his old life. The children are heartbroken as they leave their father, and they try to convince their mother to find a way to rescue him. Jessica eventually finds a way as she uses Max's diaper to take down the guard taking them away, and she pushes him off the building. Gwen eventually requests some time alone with Dan, and McCaffrey agrees. When she starts to lure Dan, that was when the family returned. Gwen was distracted and Dan took her out. Dan then apologizes once more to Jessica and the children. A final showdown takes place when McCaffrey realizes that the bodyguard taking Jessica and the children away was nowhere to be found. Realizing what that means, he orders his men to attack Dan and the family. Dan draws up a plan, and with Kyle's help, who uses a drone to track their enemies, Dan systematically takes the men down. Meanwhile, Jessica and Gwen also engage in their own fight on the roof of the building. After several failed attempts, Jessica ultimately defeats her by piercing her with a piece of broken bamboo, causing her to fall to her death. When the family returned, Dan had been subdued by McCaffrey, and he was about to pull the trigger. Nina pleads with him to consider his grandchildren and even calls him grandfather, trying to appeal to his emotions. This distracts McCaffrey for some seconds, giving Dan the opportunity to take him out. At the end, McCaffrey is finally arrested, exposing the head behind the notorious assassin organization. This was achieved due to the report Nina wrote about him and his agency,